In this session, we're going to talk about editing our TIFF files in Photoshop. This is really very basic editing. The reason for this is, remember that we want our images to be as close and as accurate of a representation of our original material as we can get. And so we're really not concerned about these being aesthetically pleasing. So we're not going to improve the color or make big changes in darkness and lightness in order to create something that is more visually interesting. We want to create as exact of a replica as we can. And again, this editing can be done with Photoshop, but it can really be done with any photo editing software. So let's get started. So those activities would include any straightening that might need to be done. And in addition to straightening, which is usually part of straightening, is cropping the image. Sometimes you'll just be doing cropping alone. You won't be doing any straightening. So we'll talk about both of those. You may do some adjustment of the color tones, and generally what we're talking about here is setting the black and white points. And we'll take a look at how to do that. And then the last thing we do is we create the derivative files. And remember, a derivative file is just simply a compressed version of that archival TIFF image that you created, or that you created through. So many of the photos that you may come across, in some cases professionally taken photos, as well as snapshots and those kinds of things that we have in our collections and archives. You'll find that many of them will not be straight. We have an image in this case of Dr. Harbison, who was one of the, I think, the earliest president of the campus, and this was a professional photo that was taken of him. But if you notice in the background, the blinds are at an angle, so the image is not straight. The good news is that all photo editing software, we happen to be using Photoshop today, but really any of the photo editing packages that are out there, all of them have a straightening feature, and they're generally pretty easy to use. With Photoshop, basically what you're going to do is you're going to find either a horizontal line that should be straight or a vertical line that should be straight but currently isn't straight. We use the ruler tool in order to mark that line, and you'll see on the left-hand side of the screen here, underneath the red circle, the ruler actually sits underneath the eyedropper tool. On this toolbar, if you're not familiar with Photoshop, they'll have one tool on top, but then if you click on this little arrow at the bottom right-hand corner, if you click on that, you will see that there are more tools underneath there, and that's kind of where the ruler sits. So with the ruler, what you do is you start at one edge of the line, whether it's horizontal or vertical, and you drag it to the other end, and you can see my straight line here. And then once you have that line selected, you can go up to the menus in Photoshop and go to Image Rotation, and Arbitrary. I'm not sure why they chose the term arbitrary, because there's nothing arbitrary about this, because you've given Photoshop the specific information that it needs in order to correct this image so that it is straight. So it's not very arbitrary, but it works well. As soon as you click on arbitrary, if the angle is off, if it's not straight, then you'll see in the middle of this image, I get a little box there that says rotate canvas, and it's suggesting that there's an angle of almost 3 points there. And it it needs to be corrected clockwise. And so when I click on OK, it will go ahead and straighten that image up for me. So the next thing that you will want to do is, more than likely, you're going to need to crop that image. We have a little bit different example here. This is actually a page from a class schedule that was scanned, and you can see in the original scan here, this whole page is crooked, as well as it's really noticeable when you look at the box that it's not sitting straight on this square. So we went ahead and straightened the scan out, and so now it does look better, it's straight. But you'll notice that when we did that, now we have a lot of white space here that we don't have over here, and that's because this got shifted, right, when it was straightened. And so now we have all of this white space, and we also have at the bottom, because they didn't set the marquee when they scanned this, we still have all of this white space at the bottom, which was just basically the glass that got scanned. So in order to eliminate that, what we need to do is to crop it. And so in the next image, you'll see that I have set the crop. If you go back over here to the toolbar, this is the tool that you will select to do cropping. And it works just like I showed you in Epson Scan last week, the little crosshairs, you pull them down diagonally, and then it will you'll be selecting basically the content that you want remaining for that scan. And you can see in the last one here, in the last image, this is our final version. And so we have retained all of the information that's on the page from our original scan. So we didn't cut any text out, and you do have to be careful of that. It's not uncommon to see footers cut off, and oftentimes on the right hand edge, if you're not careful when you're cropping, you can end up cropping information that is important. So just a word of warning there when you're setting your crop. But anyway, this is our final version. It's straight, and all of the information that we were looking for from this particular image is here. The next adjustment that we're going to make is sometimes referred to as setting the points on your images, setting the black and white points. And even though we call them black and white points, and our example here is of a grayscale image, know that this also is used for color images. And so where you see here that our channel right now is gray, if we had a color image, it could be red, could be green, could be blue. But what we're doing here is really setting points that have to do with lightness and darkness in the image. Here is our original histogram, and what this is doing, it's graphically showing us how many different tones, basically, of, in this case, grays, black and whites that we have in this grayscale image. There are 255 points along here. At the far left, everything down in this end are going to be your darker tones. And if we go to the other end, these are going to be your lighter tones. And right now, notice that for this image, this histogram shows us that the points are set at 0 and 255. But notice between 0 and probably 10 or 15 here, there really isn't anything there. The same thing happens on the other end. Not sure where this one starts, probably about 240, but between 240 and 255, there are no tones there. So what we want to do is we want to pull out, or basically make available, as many tones of either gray or black or white or color, whatever it is that you're working with. We want to be able to pull out as many of those tones, make as many of those tones available when we view the image as possible. And we do that by resetting these points. So we go to the first kind of drop off here of the mountain, and you'll see that there is above the 12 in the right hand histogram, there's like a little line. And if we look over at the other end of this, where it's 238, notice that there's a little line there. And if they weren't covered up, you would kind of see that in this first histogram as well. So what we want to do when we set the black and white points on an image is we want to bring that slider on the left-hand side to basically the end of the mountain range there. And so what happens is then everything beyond, in this case, what is 12, from 0 to 12, is going to show up as black. On the other side, it's at 238, so point 238, where that last mountain kind of ends and drops off, and so we pulled that in, so it's at 238. So right now everything that is beyond 238, so from 238 to 255, this is all going to show up as bright or white. Now white, of course, in a grayscale is not going to be a bright white. It's going to be different because it is a grayscale image, but think more in terms of light and brightness and dark on the other end. So what happens is when we make this adjustment, when we pull this into 12 and 238, what the system does is it will then stretch this out to 0 to 255. There'll be 255 points now in between 238 and 12. So we now will have 255 points through here rather than about, what, 226. So if you take 12 from 238, you have about, what, 226 points there. Well, we want a full 255 points, and so resetting these will allow us to do that. The reason that we want to stretch this out so we get 255 points is that it allows us to bring out more of those mid-range tones. And so when we're talking about a grayscale image, what that means is that there are more shades of gray, if you will, that are available that can be seen in that image that may show detail in that image. Okay, then the last thing that we need to do is we need to resize the image. Remember, what we've created at this point is an archival TIFF image with no compression, which means it's a large image, it's a big file size, and so we need to create at least one smaller version, and typically these will be JPEGs. To do this, what you're going to do is in Photoshop, you would go to Image and Image Size, and we are going to set the resolution to 150 pixels per inch. Then we're going to change the pixel dimensions. So remember, for our archival image, we have 4,000 pixels on the long side. And if you remember back to FADGI standards, basically they said that, well, sorry, not FADGI. Common practices for access images, because FADGI only addresses basically archival raster images or TIFF images, uncompressed images. For our access image, again, they're generally JPEG, and common practice is to make these between 1,000 and 3,000 pixels on the long side. Okay, so the order that you go through these steps, or the order that you do this activity, is important. You want to make sure to change the resolution first, because as soon as you change the resolution, you'll notice that the pixel dimensions will change. If we set the pixel dimensions first and then change the resolution, the dimensions would change yet again and likely then be lower than what we actually want. So we're going to set the resolution at 150 ppi, and you can see on the screen here, this says resolution 600. We're going to drop that down to 150 ppi, and then we're going to change the pixel dimension on the longest side, which in this case would be the 5610 pixels. We would change that to, I would probably do 2000 on the long side, and then click on OK. The last bullet point there on the slide is just to let you know that you can set up basically macros in Photoshop to automatically perform these on batches of images, and so you don't have to go through them one at a time. Excuse me. Okay. And of course, then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to save that. But we started off with a TIFF image, and now we're creating a JPEG image. So you're going to go to File and do Save As and choose JPEG when you're prompted to save. And then, as I mentioned with JPEG, remember, you have some options as to the quality, which also means the file size for those images. And in this case, we've selected 12. But notice as you move the slider down towards small file, your quality will go lower and lower. And so once you've decided what quality level you want to use, then just go ahead and click on OK. So I have put, it says a folder, but they're actually individual images, individual TIFF images in this week's module in Canvas. And this exercise is optional. I can't make it mandatory because PCC is not providing you with the software right now that you would need in order to do this exercise. However, I know that some of you do have photo editing software. Some of you may actually have Photoshop, but there are photo editing software options out there that are free, and GIMP is probably the most common one, GIMP. It's free as a download. There's also a trial version of Adobe Photoshop that you can use, but be careful with that one because I think it does ask you for credit card information, and then if you don't cancel it within the prescribed time, then they will bill your credit card. So if you do that one, just be careful that you don't end up purchasing something that you really don't want to purchase. But if you again, if you can get access to photo editing software, then what I'd like you to do for those images is first check to see if they need straightening. Go ahead and pick a line that should be straight, and Photoshop may come back and tell you, they may give you a 0 basically for the angle, and what that means is your image is straight, at least where you have asked Photoshop to check. And so you may not need to do any straightening. A couple of those images, though, they do need straightening. So I want you to straighten those and then crop if necessary, and in most cases you will need to crop. And then I'd like you to set the black and white points. Now, some of the images are grayscale, and at least one of them is a color image. But remember, you're setting basically blackness and lightness points, so it doesn't make any difference really if it's black and white or color. Then I want you to resize the image. So again, that's between, it's 150 pixels. I'm sorry, the resolution should be 150 ppi, and then we want between 1,000 and 3,000 pixels on the long side. So save it as a JPEG with a DPI of 150. Oh, I guess I've told you 1,000 pixels here on the long side. So give that a try and see if you're able to do that. And if you run into any problems or questions, please go to I have my hand raised discussion, and we'll talk about those.